In life, there are moments that hit us with the force of a hurricane, leaving us lost and destroyed. These tragic events force us to question everything, making us wonder if we can ever find a way out. But it is precisely in these moments that, sometimes, miracles happen. Miracles that surprise us, that change everything, and that remind us that hope is always there, even when everything seems lost. Today I will tell you the story of Marco and Sarah, a couple like many others, whose life was turned upside down by an unexpected tragedy. But what seemed to be the end of everything, turned out to be the beginning of an extraordinary journey, a journey that led them to discover the true strength of love, resilience, and how a miracle can change everything. Prepare to be inspired, moved, and discover a story that proves that even in the darkest of times, there is always a light ready to guide us to a new beginning. It was a winter evening, one of those in which the icy wind insinuates itself between the spaces of the houses and the streets empty, leaving room only for the sound of the rain beating incessantly on the pavement. Marco had stayed longer than usual in the office that evening. It had been a stressful week, with tight deadlines and a new project to turn in. All he wanted was to go home to Sarah, his wife, and put the tiring day behind him. The streets were dark and shiny, reflecting the few lights from the street lamps. Marco drove carefully, aware that the conditions were not the best. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the rain, and the lighting was insufficient to see clearly. But Marco was careful, and he knew that road well. It was the same one he took every day, a familiar path that evening, would turn into a nightmare. Suddenly, without warning, a car appeared out of the darkness. The vehicle was coming from the opposite direction, and seemed to be traveling at a breakneck speed. Marco had no time to react. Time seemed to slow down as the other car's headlights got closer and closer. In an instant, the car skidded, and the impact was inevitable. The sound of twisting metal and shattering glass filled the air, momentarily drowning out the sound of the rain. Marco's car was thrown off the road, only coming to a stop when it hit a tree. The silence that followed the crash was surreal, broken only by the steady sound of rain and the distant wail of an oncoming siren. Sarah was preparing dinner when the phone rang. The call no one ever wants to receive. The nurse's voice on the other end was calm, professional, but there was a weight to her words that Sarah felt immediately. "Your husband was involved in a serious accident," she said. "He's in critical condition. It's best for him to get here as soon as possible." Sarah's world stopped. Everything she knew, everything she took for granted, collapsed in an instant. She didn't even remember how she managed to get to the hospital. The road seemed to stretch out endlessly, like in a dream, and every second seemed to last an eternity. When she finally arrived, she was greeted by a scene that seemed to belong to a movie, not her life. Neon lights, doctors and nurses moving quickly, the incessant sound of monitors that kept track of the heartbeats of those who, like Marco, were suspended between life and death. The doctor greeted her with a look of understanding, but full of gravity. "Your husband is in a coma," he said, in the measured voice of someone who has already given many similar news. "We have done everything we can, but his condition is critical. We cannot predict, but you must prepare for the worst." Sarah felt the floor give way beneath her feet. Her mind refused to accept those words, to believe that the man she had shared her life with could be taken away like that, in an instant. The next few hours were a mixture of confusion and despair. Sarah found herself sitting next to Marco's bed, looking at his pale face, the tubes and machines that kept him alive. Every now and then, she stroked his hand, hoping to feel a sign, a movement, anything that would indicate that Marco was still there, with her. Friends and family members began to arrive, each bringing words of comfort that seemed empty, meaningless. "You have to be strong," they told her. "Don't lose hope." But Sarah felt as if she were trapped in an endless nightmare. Every day she woke up with a heavy heart, facing the reality of a life that was no longer hers. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and empty. The evenings spent talking about their plans, their dreams of a family, seemed like a distant memory, an echo of a past she could never reach again. But, despite everything, Sarah was not ready to give up. Every day she went to the hospital, sat by Marco's bed and talked to him. She told him about the little things that were happening in the outside world, she read their favorite book aloud, and, every night, before she left, she prayed. She didn't know if Marco could hear her, but it didn't matter. That was her way of staying close to him, of not letting him go. Then, one day, something happened that would change everything. It was a morning like any other. Sarah woke up at dawn, with the usual feeling of heaviness in her chest, but with the determination to keep fighting. He dressed, made a coffee that he couldn't finish, and set off for the hospital. The route had become familiar, almost automatic. He didn't expect anything different that day, just the usual routine of visits, prayers, and hopes that faded as time passed. When she entered Marco's room, however, something struck her immediately. There was a feeling in the air, a different atmosphere. Sarah approached the bed, and that was when she saw him. Marco's eyes, closed for so long, were open. They were confused, tired, but open. For a moment, Sarah was paralyzed, unable to believe what she was seeing. But when Marco slowly turned his head toward her and tried to focus on her figure, tears began to flow down her face. "Marco," he managed to whisper, holding his breath, as if he feared that any noise would break that magical moment. Marco tried to speak, but his voice was a barely audible whisper. With effort, he managed to say Sarah's name, the first word that had come from his lips in weeks. "Sarah," he said, and in that word there was everything. There was recognition, there was love, there was the knowledge of being back, of being there with her again. Sarah fell to her knees beside the bed, her hands shaking as she held Marco's. She couldn't stop crying, but this time the tears were of joy, of disbelief. The doctor, who entered shortly afterward, was equally astonished. "It's a miracle," he said, his voice almost cracking with emotion. Marco had not only emerged from his coma, but was awake and conscious, an event no one had dared to hope for. Thus began a long journey of recovery. Marco was weak, and he had months of rehabilitation ahead of him to recover his motor and cognitive functions. But every little progress, every movement he managed to make, every word he learned to say again, was a victory, not only for him, but for all those who had prayed and hoped for that miracle. Every day, Sarah was there beside him. She encouraged him, supported him, and loved him with renewed strength. The tragedy that had struck them had not broken them, but had made them stronger, more united. Every challenge overcome, every obstacle Marco managed to overcome, was a reminder that life, despite everything, was still full of possibilities. As the months passed, Marco began to talk about his experience, not only with Sarah, but also with the doctors and therapists who followed him. He spoke of how, in the darkest moments, he felt Sarah's presence beside him. Even when everything seemed distant and indistinct, he said one day, her voice was always there. It was the light that guided me through the darkness, that kept me anchored to life. Those words deeply touched Sarah, who finally understood how important his constant presence had been, his determination not to let him go. But beyond the gratitude and love she felt for Marco, a desire to do more began to grow in her, to transform that tragedy into something positive not only for them, but also for others. That's how Marco and Sarah decided to found an association dedicated to supporting victims of road accidents and their families. The association didn't just offer practical help, but above all a message of hope. Through meetings, conferences, and awareness programs, Marco and Sarah shared their story, showing everyone that, even in the most desperate situations, there is always the possibility of a rebirth. The impact of the association was immediate and profound. People felt inspired by their story, finding the strength to face their difficulties with new courage. Marco and Sarah became, day after day, a symbol of resilience, a living example of how love and determination can overcome any adversity. Over time, Marco and Sarah's life returned to a new normal. It was not the life they had before the accident, but it was a life full of meaning, full of gratitude for every day they spent together. They had learned not to take anything for granted, to celebrate every little moment, every smile, every kind word. The tragedy that had struck them had not destroyed them, but had made them stronger, more aware of the power of love and hope. Marco, who had now regained most of his abilities, continued to work with the association, speaking passionately about his experience, his rebirth. And every time he told his story, he reminded himself and others how precious life was, and how important it is to never give up, even when everything seems lost. Sarah, by his side, was his rock, his support, the person who had made that miracle possible. Looking back, he understood that tragedy, as devastating as it was, had also been an opportunity for growth, for transformation. They had lost a lot, but they had gained something invaluable, a new perspective on life, a new awareness of the importance of every single moment. And so, as the sun set on another day, Marco and Sarah found themselves walking along the path they loved so much, hand in hand, their hearts full of gratitude for the miracle that had changed everything. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for sure: together, they would face any challenge, knowing that even in the darkest moments, there is always a light ready to guide us towards a new beginning. Their story reminds us that, even when all seems lost, hope can rise from the ashes of despair. It is a story of love, resilience, and how life can surprise even in the darkest moments. Marco and Sarah have shown that, with the right attitude and the support of the right people, we can overcome any obstacle and find the strength to keep fighting. Their story is a beacon of hope for all of us. It reminds us that even in the most violent storms, there is always a chance to see the rainbow at the end. And you, what challenges are you facing? Remember, no matter how great the darkness, the light of hope is always ready to shine, if only we believe and never stop fighting. Thank you for following Marco and Sarah's story. If this story has touched and inspired you, don't forget to leave a like, share this video and subscribe to the channel for other stories that show that, despite everything, hope can triumph. Continue to believe in miracles, and find the strength to face each day with courage and love. Remember, no matter how dark the present may seem, the dawn of a new day is always on the horizon. Subscribe to the channel now. See you in the next video.